Welcome to the Chinksey Sports Presents the Premier League Show, episode 20. Straight into it. The last game of the festive period after a crazy run of fixtures. We have an FA Cup weekend to punctuate the season. So effectively, there's a little break. Right, where do we start? Before I do start, make sure you run that bath, boil that kettle, and warm up those mince pies from about 6 days ago. Okay, without any further ado, straight into it. St James's Park. Newcastle United against Nottingham Forest ended 3-1 to Forest. Newcastle's defending was an absolute shambles in this game. The Newcastle defence parted like the Red Sea to allow Nottingham Forest winger Anthony Elanga to surge forward towards goal. But the Swede decided to shoot instead of feeding an apoplectic Chris Wood. Only minutes later, in what felt like a deja vu situation, the winger this time opted to play a simple pass to Wood, who obliged. Quick learner. He then set up Chris Woods' second two. The New Zealand striker Wood then completed his hat-trick against his former side in impressive style after he put Newcastle goalkeeper Martin Dubravka on his backside and calmly slotted in. I think Newcastle manager Eddie Howe is under severe pressure to ensure the club continues to progress after crashing out of both the Carabao Cup and in Europe completely. I think he needs to secure a European position in the top 6 or 7 and a good FA Cup run. So some new signings in January are clearly needed. Right. Following that game was the game between Bournemouth and Fulham at Bournemouth. It ended 3-0 to the home side. Bournemouth condemned Fulham to their third consecutive scoreless defeat going into Sunday's crunch London derby tie against Arsenal, a team that historically they have a wretched record against. The first half was relatively even, with Fulham playing some nice stuff, but Justin Kluivert's goal at the tail end of the first half seemed to knock the stuffing out of the Cottagers. Further goals from Dominic Solanke, who I believe is on 12 league goals now, and Colombian forward Luis Sinisterra on loan from Leeds clinched the 3 points for Bournemouth, who go into Sunday's match against Tottenham, buoyed by the fact that they're the league's informed side. Right. After that was the fixture between Sheffield United and Luton Town. A very good fixture. I watched that. Very end-to-end entertaining game. Ended 3-2 to Luton. Luton had the game under control in the first half and were largely comfortable until some tactical changes at halftime from Chris Wilder turned the game on its head. Well, that was until Luton striker Carlton Morris came off the bench and curled in a fantastic in-swinging cross which forced Blades defender Jack Robinson to head into his own net past the despairing West Fotheringham. Morris then smashed the ball into former Arsenal defender Austin Trusty to put Luton 3-2 ahead. The thing with Morris is clearly a throwback big burly bulky centre forward who's a bit reminiscent of Troy Deeney. Well, don't tell that to the Luton fans because they despise Watford, and if there was ever a player who epitomises the Hornets, it's certainly him. Luton clearly have players like Ogbene, Morris and Tahith Chong that can come off the bench and impact games in a positive way, especially if the games are in the balance. And that tactic worked a treat in this one. Having watched Luton quite a bit this season, I think it's clear to see that the players are extremely motivated to 1, secure themselves a hefty win bonus, and 2, put themselves in a shop window for a transfer. So either way, they'll be in the Premier League next season and on a better contract. Unsung heroes like goalkeeper Thomas Kaminski and defenders Gabriel Osho and Alfie Doughty have really impressed me this season. Okay. Game between Burnley and Liverpool ended 2-0 to Liverpool as they went top of the league. Liverpool tore through Burnley in the opening 20 minutes, and how it was only 1-0, only God knows. Well, you could say James Trafford's numerous saves had a lot to do with it too. Cody Gakpo ran the show in the first half and managed to grab himself an assist for Darwin Núñez. He then thought he'd scored one for himself, but that goal was ruled out after a Darwin Núñez foul. French teenager Wilson Odubert looked really sprightly, bubbly and confident in that game as he really took the game to Liverpool, enabling Burnley to slowly creep back into the game, slowly but surely, especially in the second half. As you could see they were starting to grow in confidence as the longer the game went on at 1-0. Jurgen Klopp then rung in the changes, and the returning forward Diogo Jota managed to come on and clinch the game with a late finish from a tight angle. Good finish too. Right, following that was the game that I was looking forward to the most, which was Manchester United and Aston Villa. It ended 3-2 to United. Despite United, for me, starting the game quite well, it was Aston Villa who raced into a 2-goal lead with 2 quick-fire goals from a John McGinn free kick, which managed to evade everyone and creep into the back of the net, following horrendous marking from a corner, was the second goal, which allowed Belgian midfielder Leander Dendoncker free to prod home from close range. Despite this though, United came to life and showed great character to create several chances. Manchester United played some exceptional one-touch football at times and completely dominated the game as soon as Villa got their second goal. When Alejandro Garnacho halved the deficit just minutes after his first effort was ruled out for offside, you just knew that the equaliser would follow, and it did. The Argentine bagged a brace in what was surely Manchester United's best performance of the season. Villa forward Ollie Watkins barely had a kick in anger. He was awful really, but he didn't have service. A conclusion that I've come to having watched a lot of him this season is that his assets are made redundant if you deny him space to run into. A bit like Aubameyang. Rasmus Højlund finally ended his nightmare United goal draw to put United ahead 3-2. Ten Hag then brought on youth prospects Willy Cambrala, Hannibal Medri and Dan Gore. Unai Emery's failure to make changes when it was clear that the momentum was with United came back to bite him on the back as United secured a much-deserved victory. Okay, following that, I believe it was Wednesday's game between Brentford and Wolverhampton Wanderers. One result that I did not see coming at all. Wolves were magnificent once again, clinching their second successive win. But one thing Wolves have struggled with this season is consistency, consequently leading to a lack of momentum. So it will be interesting to see if they can build on this form, because if they can, then a 9th or 10th position finish isn't beyond reach. Interestingly though, their next 2 fixtures after Everton later on today see them return to the GTEC Stadium to face Brentford again, this time in the FA Cup, and then they face Brighton, who smashed them 4-1 at Molineux. So could they get revenge on Wolves? Or could they get revenge on Brighton? In games that represented both their best and worst performances of the season. Wolves' front three, mind you, consisting of Sarabia, Mateus Cunha and Hwang, not to mention Portuguese winger Pedro Neto, now back fit, will pose a threat to any side in this league. Brentford, now after a prolonged period of woeful form, must accept that they're involved in a relegation battle as their 2 best players, Ivan Toney, who's banned for another couple of weeks, I believe, he's back in January, and Brian Mbeumo is out injured for the next few months. I heard it's till February. So they have to come to terms with the fact that relegation looms if they don't change something and quick. If they sell Tone now, I feel that they could go because their squad severely lacks quality. Okay, following that was the game between Chelsea and Crystal Palace, which was an 8:15 kickoff. It ended 2-1 to Chelsea. One-time France cap, Malo Gusto, looked impressive both defensively and offensively as he got himself the assist for Mikhailo Mudrik's opener with some great skill and poise. The Ukrainian had all eyes on him as Sterling and Palmer were out through suspension, and he didn't disappoint. He was very good, just as Chelsea were, carving through the Palace defence at ease. However, the mercurial Palace and France under-21 winger Michael Olise had other ideas. At the stroke of half-time, he scored an impressive equaliser against the run of play. England under-21 starlet Noni Madueke came off the bench and caused Tyrick Mitchell numerous problems before scoring what turned out to be the winning goal from the spot after he was fouled by Ebere Eze in what was ultimately a stonewall penalty. The young winger did enough to start alongside the returning Cole Palmer behind Nicholas Jackson for the game against Luton, which is now kicking off. Maurizio Pochettino then managed to give Alfie Gilchrist, a 20-year-old academy player, his first team debut. He looked passionate and committed in the challenge, clearly one for the future. So a good hard-fought victory for Chelsea, which brought them closer to the European places and yeah, obviously dispelled their poor performance against Wolves on Sunday and got them back to winning ways in front of their own crowd. Game between Everton and Manchester City ended 3-1 to City. City looked sharp and at it on the back of their World Club Cup Championship triumph, following wins against Urawa Red Diamonds of Japan and Fluminense of Brazil. They were knocking the ball about with a swagger befitting of treble winners and world champions that they now are. But it was Everton who took the lead via former Manchester City player Jack Harrison, who scored with probably his first touch in half an hour's play of football. Everton then grew into the game and began to impose themselves a bit on Manchester City and not be as passive as they were at the start of the game. Then in the second half, the game followed the same pattern, but this time City's incessant pressure brought two quick-fire goals via Phil Foden and a Julian Alvarez spot kick in the absence of Erling Haaland. Jack Grealish was different gravy in this game, teasing the Everton defenders and typically drawing fouls with his magnificent dribbling and ball control. It looks like he's back in his stride now after a run of starts in the side in the absence of Belgian Jeremy Doku. It was Phil Foden who was equally as good, if not better. As was Phil Foden. Bernardo Silva, who has bags and bags of finesse, killed the game off as a contest with a delightful strike with City's third goal. If City continue in this vein of form, then the title race will be ominous. Before this game, Sean Dyche had a record of never losing a game as Everton boss in which his side have scored first in. But this is Pep Guardiola's Manchester City. He now has 8 successive victories at Goodison Park. 8 wins in a row at Goodison Park. Crazy. Right, Thursday's game between Brighton Hove Albion and Tottenham Hotspur ended 4-1 to Brighton. The first half was basically a battle between Brazil striker João Pedro and Italian stopper Guillermo Vicario. Pedro will now be vying with Richarlison and Gabriel Jesus for a starting berth in the Brazil team. Spurs' start to the game was the equivalent to them planting their flag at the Amex Stadium or taking to the centre of the ring, as for boxing terminology, with their brash attacking style taking the game to their opponents. Yet despite this, they found themselves 2-0 down at half time. Brighton, playing on a counter-attack, simply had more bite and more purpose in their attacks. Vicario, a supremely talented shot stopper, made a series of saves, but 18-year-old Jack Hinchelwood's strike inside the box was hit so cleanly and with such ferocity that three keepers would have struggled to keep it out. The aforementioned João Pedro, who's been Brighton's best player this season, making his 50th Premier League appearance. 50 is a lot. Got himself the assist and added a second to give the Seagulls a 2-0 lead inside the first 25 minutes. Ecuadorian international Pervis Estupiñán came on as a substitute at half-time to get the third for Brighton after the break to kill the game off as a contest. He's arguably the league's best fullback and was last season, for sure. Another penalty from Pedro made it 4-0 to add insult to injury for Spurs and kill the game off as a contest. Inevitably consolidating his man-of-the-match performance. 20-year-old Argentine sub Alejo Veliz and Ben Davies grabbed late consolations for Tottenham as they threw the kitchen sink and the washing machine at Brighton, but the Seagulls held out as the game ended 4-2. You could argue that had the game been 10 minutes longer, Spurs would have equalised. The last game of Game Week 19 was, you could argue, the shock of Game Week 19. Well, it was the shock of Game Week 19. West Ham went to the Emirates and triumphed 2-0 against Arsenal. The game resembled the Everton v Man City and Manchester United v Aston Villa games, wherein the Manchester side started the game well but trailed at half-time. West Ham's low block was inevitable, and once they got the game's opener through Czech midfielder Thomas Souček, who has been a revelation this season, arriving late into the box, Arsenal's task doubled in difficulty. Mohamed Kudus, for me, was the best player on the park in that first half, a constant thorn in the Arsenal attack with his electric pace and dribbling on the break, drawing fouls from the Arsenal defenders. After West Ham lost their talisman, Lucas Paqueta, to a hamstring strain after just half an hour, the emphasis was more on the Ghanaian to create. Early in the second half, West Ham got a second goal and ultimately the clincher after their former Arsenal centre-half Konstantinos Mavropanos headed in a James Ward-Prowse corner kick after a phenomenal leap. Arsenal were poor throughout and got what they deserved. Nothing. Former Hammers captain Declan Rice had a terrible game against his former club, and to compound his misery, gave away a last-minute penalty which David Raya saved after a tame effort from Saeed Benrahma. West Ham have now added Arsenal alongside Tottenham and Brighton to their growing list of illustrious scalps away from home in what was definitely the shock of Game Week 19. Okay, so that was Game Week 19's fixtures. A lot of goals, flurry of goals, a couple of shock results, namely the Arsenal result. You could argue the Brighton one was a shock, but also the Newcastle one, which was a coupon buster for anyone who had Newcastle on their bet slip. But straight into Game Week 20's fixtures. We're obviously starting with the game at Kenilworth Road between Luton and Chelsea. I've gone 2-1 to Chelsea. I think this is a difficult match to call, but I'm going for a tight 2-1 away win for Chelsea. Having just seen the team sheets, Luton's team sheet suggests that they are looking to stay in the game for as long as possible, then bring on the likes of Carlton Morris with his industry and power, Chiedozie Ogbene with his pace and strong running ability, as well as Tahith Chong and Pelly Roderick Panzu, who significantly add to Luton's attack late on in the game. Especially as veteran forward Andros Townsend would definitely lead to come off in the second half. Chelsea seem to have gone for strong, industrious, powerful players ready for the physical challenge of Luton, with the likes of Raheem Sterling, Mikhailo Mudryk and Christopher Nkunku all pacey attacking players, and I'm sure will come on in the second half to stretch a tiring Luton defence. I think this should be an interesting game, a game that both teams will feel that they can win. A Chelsea win will take them to within just 5 points of sixth placed West Ham, whereas a Luton Town win would see them leapfrog both Everton and Nottingham Forest out of the drop zone. So I've gone for a 2-1 Chelsea win. Following that, a 3 o'clock kickoff at Villa Park between Aston Villa and Burnley. I've gone for a 3-1 win to Aston Villa. Aston Villa have somewhat stumbled of recent since their victories against last season's top two, Manchester City and Arsenal. Anything but a win against 19th place Burnley, and you'll start to wonder whether the pressure of expectation is starting to get to them. Burnley are 5 points adrift from safety, and a defeat here could see that deficit increase, and you could start to worry about Vincent Kompany's future at the club. 3-1 Villa. Game between Crystal Palace and Brentford, struggling Brentford in this London derby. Obviously, Brentford have lost a number of games in a row. They are now struggling for goals, struggling to create chances. Obviously, like I mentioned already, they've lost Ivan Toney and now Brian Mbeumo through both injury, and obviously Toney's got a ban, but he should be back in the next few weeks. So obviously they'll take a point, I think, just to stop the rock. However, on the other side, Crystal Palace, they picked up a few draws of recent. They've been struggling themselves. They played half decent against Chelsea, but were unfortunate to lose. However, I did think Chelsea did deserve to win. But I think they're just going to cancel each other out. And I think probably on the face of things, I think both teams would probably take a point just to add to their tally and move away from the relegation zone, especially with Luton picking up a few wins of recent. So I think that's going to be a stalemate, 1-1. Similarly, Everton have been on good form of recent. However, they've come up unstuck against Tottenham and Man City. So they're going to want to stop their losing streak of 2 games. They'll take a point, I think, because obviously they're going into Molineux, a place which has been a fortress for Wolves this season. And obviously, I've mentioned already, Wolves have won the last 2 games. So I think, all in all, I think that's going to result in Everton kind of grinding out a victory. I think Wolves would probably want to win this one, but I think it's going to end in a stalemate, 1-1. 3 o'clock kickoff at Manchester City between Man City and Sheffield United. The result looks ominous. Having watched Manchester City against Everton, especially in that second half, it looks like they've clicked into gear, and if they play anything like that in this fixture, then nothing Chris Wilder tries will stop City from picking up 3 points. The likes of Jack Grealish, Phil Foden and Bernardo Silva will fancy their chances of adding to both their goals and assist tally. I've gone for 4-0 to Manchester City. The 5:30 kickoff between Nottingham Forest and Manchester United should be a really entertaining game, as obviously Nottingham Forest have got a new manager, Nuno Espirito Santo. The first game he lost to Bournemouth 3-2. Obviously he had 10 men in that game, so you could say it was a bit unfortunate. However, he did pick up a win against Newcastle away from home. So obviously you would say confidence will be flowing back into his side. He was really attacking in that game, starting wingers Callum Hudson-Odoi and Anthony Elanga. Anthony Elanga got himself a couple assists, played really well in that game. Chris Wood got himself a hat-trick. Elanga's obviously up against his former club, of whom he came through the youth system. So it'll be interesting to see how he fares up against the likes of Wan-Bissaka or Diego Dalot. So I think this game's going to have goals in it, especially with United back to winning ways with an impressive victory against Aston Villa. So they'll have confidence coming back into them. I think obviously Marcus Rashford and Garnacho played well in that game. They will be a threat. So the wings, I think, will be where this game's won and lost, with obviously, like I mentioned, Odoi and Elanga on in Forest wing, and then obviously you got Rashford and Garnacho who Rashford looked good in that game, so it'll be interesting to see how he fares. But I've gone for a 2-2 draw. I think it's going to be an entertaining fixture, full of goals. Right, Sunday's fixture between Fulham and Arsenal, London Derby, is one that Arsenal simply know that they must win. After disappointing result and performance against West Ham sent shockwaves through the Premier League, anything but an away win would see their title hopes hanging by a thread. They come up against the Fulham side with three former Gunners, two of which will be in the starting 11, Alex Iwobi and Bernd Leno. I don't think Willian's fit, but he might be. As well as two more with a point to prove. João Paulinho, heavily linked with a January move to Arsenal, and Calvin Bassey sent off in the corresponding fixture in August. Fulham's poor form going into this game and their poor form against Arsenal on the whole should count for nothing though, because they'll be fully aware that they need to hit a certain standard and hope Arsenal are off it to have a chance in this one. But I'm going for a 2-0 away win to Arsenal. Following that is the game, another exciting game, similar to the Forest and United game. I think it's going to have a lot of goals, is Tottenham and Bournemouth. This should be an interesting game because Bournemouth know that they are 4 or 5 wins from securing safety and will play with a freedom befitting of a side brimming with confidence after 6 wins and a draw with Aston Villa in their last 7 games. So that's 7 games unbeaten. Really impressive from Andoni Iraiola's men. He's probably a candidate for manager of the season as well. The pressure's all on Tottenham though, because their fans will be expecting a win after their defeat, or their disappointing defeat at Brighton on Thursday. Given how both teams play, I think this is going to be like a basketball match. I think there's going to be goals aplenty in this one, especially as Spurs are playing with 4 fullbacks in defence. One thing's for sure though, I don't think Spurs will lose this one, but they need a win here, and I think they're going to get it. I think they're going to come out on top 3-2 in a 5-goal thriller. Right, the first game of the new year on New Year's Day between Liverpool and Newcastle United. I've gone big on this one. I've gone 4-1, although it could be 3. Liverpool come into this game after 2 successive home draws to Manchester United and Arsenal, knowing that if they win, they'll be top regardless of what Arsenal, City, Villa and Spurs do this weekend. Newcastle will be the first team that the Reds have played twice this season following their corresponding match at St James's Park, which Liverpool won 2-1 with 10 men in dramatic circumstances after Trent Alexander-Arnold saw red early in the game. Newcastle come into this game having lost, listen to this, 8 games in their last 12 in all competitions since beating Arsenal in controversial circumstances. Alarmingly, they've lost their last 5 straight away matches in the league. Those stats are enough for me to think that Liverpool will make it 6 and start the new year off with a win. Right, the last game of game week 20 is another exciting fixture. After West Ham and Brighton's heroic exploits against the North London duo Arsenal and Tottenham on Thursday, I'm sure that a lot of people will assume that West Ham will win this one. But I've taken into account that the Hammers have lost their best player, Lucas Paqueta, to injury, Brighton's performance against Spurs, and the fact that Arsenal had 30 shots and 77 touches in West Ham's box, and Brighton had 25 shots against West Ham, who won both games away from home against by 2 goals against Arsenal and Brighton respectively. However, West Ham are at home and the onus will be on them to be more attacking, which if they are, I'm sure Brighton would prefer. As they say, styles make fights, And this makes for an intriguing battle, just one that I think Brighton will come out on top of. Right, so that was that for episode 20. Obviously, FA Cup weekend follows this week's fixtures, so there's going to be a little break, but I should be back